haven't done before we get into the highlights here, at least for the next couple weeks. I want to kick things off with like a quick roundtable discussion about a topic and sort of how it relates to reality TV. Um, this week, I wanted to start with the term guilty pleasure, which is a term that I've heard both people that watch reality TV and people who don't, use to describe it. Um, so just to kind of give my thoughts before opening up the floor, and like feel free to like disagree with me here, but I really like kind of hate hearing that term used to describe shows like Real Housewives and Vanderpump Rules. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I don't necessarily hate that term itself, but when you apply it to shows like Real Housewives and Vanderpump Rules, it just feels like steeped in misogyny. Like I
Hmm.
think I don't think that people that use it necessarily are like being intentionally like misogynist, but I think it comes from this like societal tendency to be dismissive of any like femme-coded content and like just kind of like make it seem like it's less worthy of serious consideration in
Hmm.
comparison to like male targeted content. um you know which kind of like reinforces the double standard within entertainment, because like the language that we use regarding reality TV is drastically different, or the language we use regarding femme coded content is drastically different than how people talk about like comic book movies or sports. Sean, Dylan, your thoughts on that, or the term in general?
Well, I always want to say that like I shouldn't take any guilt and pleasure, but there's like a deep-seated part of me that was raised Catholic that can't separate the terms. But I think it mostly boils down to like aesthetic judgments and moral ones, and like those often I don't conflate. Like I don't see why you would put a moral judgment into watching Real Housewives or Vanderpump Rules or anything else. It's only when you get into like I don't know if I were like signing up for Roman Polanski's Patreon or something, then maybe there's like a way that those conflate. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me to feel guilt in taking in something you're enjoying. But it does seem really more directed at, like you say, femme code and stuff. Like, because this is, for example, this is exactly the same as professional wrestling, which I love.
Yeah.
And that gets, people may think it's a little silly, but I feel like it does not at all get um, the same kind of aspersions cast on it.
Yeah. I
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I agree. Like I feel like I mostly agree that you shouldn't be feel guilty about something that you take pleasure in, but at the same time, like guilty pleasure is like a term that I would apply to, you know, my love of Hallmark movies, which is something that I like also really enjoy at Christmas time, watching these Hallmark movies. But I do consider that more of a guilty pleasure, and like not because those are also like kind of like femme coded, but I feel like when you're watching something like Real Housewives, I just think like the way that it's framed for the audience expects a lot more like critical thinking. Like there's I feel guilty about enjoying Hallmark movies because I think that um it places forward values that are um like dated and like wrong and
mm,
like just like overall just like needs updating and just kind of icky. Um, and that's not to say that Housewives doesn't also do that, but I think that the way that it's framed for the audience is different. There's like this expectation that the audience is, thinking about these things critically and, because you are constantly reevaluating like the positions of the players within Housewives. I think you are thinking, a bit more broadly and more um like a more worldly sense about like it's like, oh, okay, this person is saying, like, Ramona is saying whatever Ramona singer is saying this week, which is obviously gonna just be so like backwards and dated. But like, you've got that sense, you are like, you're operating critically as you're consuming it, whereas Hallmark movies, you're not. You're supposed to just be like feed in the warm fuzzies, and
Just empty
don't think
calories.
too critically. Yeah, exactly.
Right, but then you're also talking about like how you're expected to watch something versus how you're actually watching it. And I feel like the way that you are watching it is probably a little bit different than what you're describing as the expectation. And I think that's part of the reason why, for me, like you guys, I don't like the term guilty pleasures at all. If somebody wants to use it to describe the warm fuzzies they have curling up on the couch with a tub of Haagen-Dazs watching their shows or whatever, like awesome, like you do you. But the term for me is something that I buck at, I buck and whinny like a scared horse. It's like that in the same category as calling something entertainment, not art, or calling something a movie, not a film. Any
I hate
attempt
that.
to just pull out the velvet ropes and try to cordon off some art as like the acceptable, respectable bit, and others as the disreputable ones is just always to me. I have that reaction of it being just kind of antithetical to the whole project and just very rooted in that uh, the bourgeois project of trying to turn your artistic taste into class signifiers, treating the kind of art that you choose to engage with the same way you would treat like the clothes you wear, or like this Ames chair I bought or whatever. That's fine for furniture and your haircuts and what color you paint your door. Like those things are kind of for that. But I just think that you should be interacting with art in a different way because it's serving a different purpose. And I when I'm going and sitting in front of a screen and like a content hog and just getting my fix, I don't really have a trouble turning off the inner censor or is whatever is making me see myself as a subject in like the social sphere. Like I'm as subject to super ego pressures as the next motherfucker, but um I don't have a trouble like turning that off when I watch art. And maybe I'd have to thank like my brain chemistry for that or something. But I get that some people will like struggle with that. It can be a thing that's maybe easier said than done. But I think it's something that's worth trying to do. And what bugs me is when people, instead of trying to buck whatever internalized censor they have in their head, telling them what you should or should not do because it's a signifier of your class aspirations or like what is should be considered correct or not, when you're not only not trying to turn that off but are embracing it, is something that I'm not really okay with, because it just seems to be against the whole idea of art, which you should be going into, I think, as something that will expand your horizons and as something that you can allow to try to um, let you think about the world in a way that doesn't have you as a subject deeply invested into it. Not saying that it's not like involving yourself in like a social project by engaging with art, but if you turn off the super ego pressure, you are sorry about the Freudian terms. I didn't mean to come on your show and start talking like Slavoj Žižek or something. In the Vanderpump rules, the dog Gordo is super ego. Watch, okay, and so on. But I just think if you're from the bat letting that inner censor decide whether or not you're even allowing yourself to watch something, or allowing it yourself to watch it with an open mind, instead of feeling like you have to force your perspective into the means of watching it that you're told is the only way you're allowed to watch it. Like, I'm only allowed to watch this on the surface. I'm only allowed to
Yeah.
be entertained, as people say, because I've been told that's all that this is good for. If you're already setting up those barriers for yourself, well, you're missing an opportunity to maybe rewire the way you think and to maybe engage with a fuller range of artistic experience. And I get that there's a little high associated too with, strapping on the rough collar and being the Puritan censorious critic, and getting to decide what's good and what's right and what's not. But I don't think you're gaining anything by that, and you are potentially amputating artistic experiences that could be really nourishing if you allowed yourself to.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I wonder if there is like a discrepancy between people who, when they're discussing this, like their fandom of Bravo shows and use the term guilty pleasure, whether they actually like internally consider it a guilty pleasure, or if that's just how they label it when they
Yeah.
talk about it. And um you know I think I probably have to acknowledge a little bit of privilege as someone who identifies as a straight male. I don't really have to worry about entering into any like conversation and articulating my love for Bravo as I often do, and worry about whether or not my peers in the workplace are going to continue to take me seriously. I feel like there's probably a lot of women do have to be a lot more guarded, especially in like male dominated fields. So
Mm-hmm.
I do expect that there is a discrepancy between the way that people talk about it and the way they actually consume the art.
Yeah, almost like
Mm.
the phrase guilty pleasure can be sort of an insulation from criticism of like crappy dudes.
Ye-
Yeah.
yeah, just like insulation from criticism in general, I think. And you know I think, I think, it's, you have to do what you have to do in order to like get by based on the, the circumstances that you're in. So I don't think that anyone is, um, propping up the patriarchy by like discussing reality TV as a guilty pleasure. But I do think, as and one of the things that I want to do with this podcast is enable people that do have that privilege to speak more openly about the artistic and cultural merit of these shows, so that um so that people's minds hopefully open to the validity of this programming and not be so dismissive of it. And um yeah, that's all my thoughts on the term guilty pleasure.